features of oxygen. Oxygen is a colorless, odorless, tasteless, and non-toxic gas. These are essential properties for oxygen to be capable of use by living things. Oxygen makes up 21% of the air we breathe. Were that proportion to rise to just 25%, then there would be a significant rise in the number of explosions of flammable materials on our planet. Our Lord has created the oxygen in the atmosphere to be at a level where it has no explosive effect, and this is, without doubt, a very great miracle. Energy is essential for life. We obtain energy by burning the foods we consume from plants. Burning takes place as foods react with oxygen. The fundamental reaction that produces energy for living things is the oxidation or burning of carbon and hydrogen compounds. Our bodies are basically composed of carbon and hydrogen compounds. So, why don't our bodies suddenly burn up like matchsticks? It is indeed amazing how bodies do not burn up, despite being in constant contact with oxygen. This is because, under ambient temperatures, the molecular form of oxygen, O2, is, to a large extent, inert, which means it is non-reactive. But this gives rise to another question. As oxygen is a molecule that does not react easily, then how does this molecule enter into reactions in our bodies? The answer to this question, which has perplexed scientists ever since the 19th century, emerged as the result of advances over the last 50 years. Biochemical observations revealed that certain special enzymes in the human body are solely responsible for causing the form of oxygen found in the atmosphere, O2, to enter into reaction. As the result of highly complex processes, these special enzymes in our cells use iron and copper atoms in our bodies as catalysts, or, in other words, accelerants, and thus turn oxygen into a reactive form. This is a most noteworthy state of affairs. Oxygen is a flammable element and would normally be expected to also ignite our bodies. In order to prevent that, O2, the form of oxygen in the atmosphere, is created to be inert so that it does not react easily. But our bodies need oxygen to be reactive in order to generate energy. For that purpose, a complex enzyme system that makes this inert gas highly reactive has been installed in our cells. The enzyme system in question is a marvel of creation that the theory of evolution, which maintains that life emerged by coincidence, can never account for. One feature of this enzyme system is that it only functions on the condition that it works in full complexity, for which reason it cannot be reduced to a simpler form, and it is therefore impossible to maintain, as evolution claims, that this system followed a developmental course from the simple to the more advanced. Professor Ali Demirsoy, a biologist from Hacettepe University in Turkey, and one of the country's leading proponents of evolution, makes this admission on the subject. But there is a still unresolved problem here. In performing this breakdown with oxygen, mitochondria use a specific number of enzymes. The absence of one of these enzymes will cause the whole system to stop working. In addition, energy acquisition with oxygen cannot be regarded as a system that could develop in stages. Only the whole thing can establish a functional system. For that reason, instead of the stage-by-stage development we have been espousing as a principle hitherto, we have to assume, no matter how unwillingly, and however slight the probability, that all the enzymes, the enzymes of Krebs cycle, that would carry out oxygen reactions of the mitochondria entered the cell at one single time by chance, or that they all formed within the cell at the same time, because all systems that cannot make full use of oxygen, or that remain at an intermediate stage, would be destroyed when they came into contact with oxygen. Ali Demirsoy, Basic Principles of Life, General Biology. The probability of just one of the enzymes that Professor Demirsoy says we have to assume came about all at once, by chance, forming spontaneously, is just 1 in 10 to the 950th power, in other words, impossible. So it is of course irrational to suggest that many such enzymes all came about through coincidences. Carbon does not easily react with oxygen at normal temperatures. But the chemical properties of oxygen and carbon have been so arranged that they only react and produce combustion at a very high temperature. Were that not so, life on Earth would become impossible. If oxygen and carbon were slightly more disposed to react, then when the temperature rose slightly, it would be nothing out of the ordinary for people, trees, and animals to combust and burn all of a sudden. For example, someone walking in the desert suddenly burst into flames when the temperature reached its maximum in the middle of the day like a matchstick. Plants and animals would be exposed to the same danger. Obviously, there could in fact be no life to speak of at all in such a world. If oxygen and carbon possessed rather higher inert properties, then it would be very difficult to light a fire on Earth, and maybe impossible. And without fire, it would be impossible for people to warm themselves or technology to develop, because apparently technology depends on metals, and metals can only be used by melting and molding them at very high temperatures. This shows that the chemical properties of oxygen and carbon are again perfectly arranged for human life. Michael Denton writes this on the subject. This curious unreactivity of the carbon and oxygen atoms at ambient temperatures, combined with the enormous energies inherent in their combination once achieved, is of great adaptive significance to life on Earth. It is this curious combination that not only makes available to advanced life forms the vast energies of oxidation in a controlled and orderly manner, but has also made possible the controlled use of fire by mankind, and allowed the harnessing of the massive energies of combustion for the development of technology. Michael Denton, Nature's Destiny, pages 122 to 123. To put it another way, carbon and oxygen were created in the ideal form for life. The properties of these two elements allow us to light a fire and use that fire in the most suitable way. Moreover, everywhere on Earth is full of trees that contain high levels of carbon that we can easily use to make fire. These things all show that fire and materials related to it are created in the ideal forms for human life. Indeed, Allah says in the Qur'an, "I seek refuge in Allah from the accursed Satan. He who produces fire for you from green trees, so that you use them to light your fires." Our body's ability to use oxygen stems from the fact that this gas is also soluble in water. The oxygen that enters our lungs when we breathe immediately dissolves and enters the bloodstream. A protein called hemoglobin in the blood traps these oxygen molecules and transports them to the cells. By means of the special system inside the cells that we have just seen, carbon compounds known as ATP are burned using this oxygen, and energy is thus obtained. All complex life forms obtain energy through this system, but the functioning of the system of course depends, primarily, on the solubility of oxygen. If it were not sufficiently soluble, then little oxygen would enter the blood, and that would not be enough to meet the cell's energy needs. Were oxygen more soluble, the level of oxygen in the blood would rise enormously and give rise to oxidation toxicity. What would happen if oxygen were slightly more or less soluble? Let us look at the first probability. If oxygen were slightly less soluble in water, and therefore in blood, then less oxygen would enter the bloodstream, and the cells would not receive enough oxygen. In that event, it would be very hard for life forms with high metabolisms, such as human beings, to survive. If that were the case, no matter how much we breathed, the oxygen in the air would still fail to reach the cells in sufficient amounts, so we would face the constant danger of gradual suffocation. If oxygen were slightly more soluble, the result would be oxidation toxicity, as we have just described. Oxygen is actually a very dangerous gas and can be fatal to living things when normal limits are exceeded. When the level of oxygen in the blood rises, this oxygen reacts with water and gives rise to highly reactive and destructive side products. The body contains complex enzyme systems that overcome this effect of oxygen. But if the oxygen level rose slightly, these enzyme systems would not work, and every breath we took would poison our bodies more, and we would soon die. The American biochemist Erwin Friedrich says this on the subject: "All respiring organisms are caught in a cruel trap. The very oxygen which supports their lives is toxic to them, and they survive precariously, only by virtue of elaborate defense mechanisms." Erwin Friedrich, Oxygen Radicals, Hydrogen Peroxide, and Oxygen Toxicity. Free Radicals in Biology, edited by W. A. Pryor, New York, Academic Press, 1976, pages 239 to 240. What protects us from this trap, from either oxygen toxicity or suffocation from lack of oxygen, is that the level of solubility of oxygen and the complex enzyme systems in the body are set out and created just as required. Allah has created the air we breathe and the systems that enable us to use that air in perfect harmony with one another.